If there is one team that isn't happy with how they ended things in the last two races of the season, that has to be Red Bull. Although many thought of Verstappen and Perez as a perfect pair of teammates, this turned out to be far from truth. After everything that Perez did for Red Bull, one couldn't help but wonder whether the team has treated him dirty and has prioritized Max in situations where they shouldn't have.
Nothing to say really. I mean, after all I've done for him, it's a bit disappointed, to be honest.
This is why Perez is very unhappy as of now at Red Bull, and to make things worse for him, the team has made a decision that translates as bad news for the Mexican. In the end of the 2020 season, Perez drove one of the most legendary races that the F1 world has seen, winning a race that he was last at one point in, making himself a race winner in F1. The emotional podium was everything that Red Bull needed to see and replace Albon with Perez in 2021. But when the 2021 season started, Perez knew his role and knew that he needed to support Max as much as he could in order for the Dutchman to win the championship, and that's exactly what he did. We recall some of the legendary drives in Turkey when Perez's aggressive defense against Hamilton prevented the seven-time world champion from passing the second Red Bull driver, with Max leading comfortably at P2. Also, the legendary defense in Abu Dhabi is what allowed Verstappen to cut 8 seconds off Hamilton's lead in just one lap, and that seems to have been forgotten in the last 2 weekends in Brazil and Abu Dhabi. Verstappen refused to give Perez the possession back after the Mexican gave it to him voluntarily so that he could chase Leclerc and cut more points off the Monegasque in the final stages of the race. But even with Verstappen failing in this mission, the two-time world champion didn't yield to the team's orders and said that he had his own reasons for doing exactly what he did.
Your teammate was very upset that you didn't give him the position. Can you tell us why you didn't?
Yeah, my reasons before that, during the year, what happened.
At this point, the media was really angry at how Perez was treated, and rest assured it was Red Bull versus Perez from this point on. But after the Abu Dhabi race, in which Perez also felt Verstappen interfered with the results in 2 ways, the Austrian team felt like they needed to show the Mexican why he was signed by Red Bull in the first place. What is it that Verstappen did in Abu Dhabi that interfered with Perez's race? First, it appears that Perez was held by Verstappen's slow pace after the Dutchman exited the pit stop, implying that Perez battled tyre degradation. When he told this to the team radio, indirectly asking for Verstappen's place, the Dutchman increased the tempo and left Perez back in the dust.
Yeah, don't worry about the DRS, Max. Let Checo through. Let Checo through. Max, let Checo through, please.
However, Perez's tyre degradation was extreme, and he was forced to pit for the second time, forcing him to chase Leclerc in the closing stages of the race. This is something that he failed to accomplish, and finishing P3 behind the Monegasque meant that Perez lost the battle for P2 in the Drivers' Championship. The second thing that Perez felt was regarding Verstappen's option to not slow down deliberately and hold up Leclerc. This is something that Verstappen was asked about directly after the press conference, and when explaining his reasons for doing what he did, the Dutchman added, "That is quite a tricky call to make. You also don't want to end up, of course, you can possibly block. But I mean, is that fair racing? I think it's not the nicest way going out of the season like that." It looked like Checo was catching him enough to try and actually get a move. But then he lost quite a bit of time with that bit of a fuss between Pierre and Alex. He lost quite a bit of time with that because I was watching that on the screens.
Explained that to the team before I came here. We sat together, we put everything on the table, and we agreed that, of course, in Abu Dhabi we want to win the race, but it's also important that Checo, finishes second, and if I have to help, I will do that.
The nerve that Verstappen has to label what's fair racing and what's not after everything Perez did last year for him, right? Still, this is far from the actual bombshell that Red Bull dropped on Perez, as the signing of Ricciardo as the reserve driver is something that shocked Perez more than the actual outcome of the previous races. With Red Bull joining forces with Ricciardo, Perez is directly reminded that he is not to mess with the Dutchman and his aspirations to win races. After all, Verstappen is the number one in the team, and although Perez was close on multiple occasions, such as after Monaco, when the difference between these two was just 15 points, he never got anywhere near the championship level of Verstappen, and that is something that the team may have interfered directly with by building the car more towards Verstappen. It could be that Verstappen is just a superhuman who knows how to drive anything that's thrown at him, or it could be that the team recognizes that Verstappen is the one who can bring championships, with Perez actually being slower than both Ferrari drivers and both Mercedes drivers on multiple occasions. According to David Coulthard, who is a former Formula 1 driver and spent some time in Red Bull, Sergio Perez is the only guy who needs to blame himself for the outcome of the 2022 season because he wasn't fast enough. On top of that, David said that Perez should be grateful to Red Bull after they salvaged his career back in 2021. When talking about this matter, Coulthard explained, "It was an open conversation and there's nothing to be interpreted. The team made a request and the driver denied it. The answer was there before and someone has knocking again to try to get a different answer. Being consistent in your behavior patterns is a quality. Inconsistency is what you need to watch out for because you don't know what you're dealing with." Checo was out of Formula 1 with no one knocking on his door. Red Bull gave him the opportunity to come back and a car that's nailed on to win races. He's had a fair crack of the whip to try and beat Max, and he has consistently not delivered on the same level. He has occasionally done so, and I admire the victories he has had. Still, one couldn't help but notice that the Perez seat in Red Bull is going to be a very jeopardized one in the 2023 season, especially now that Ricciardo has been signed as the third driver in the team. If there is any driver that could replace Perez for the 2023 season, that is definitely Ricciardo. He knows how the car works and understands the philosophy of the car better than any other driver on the grid. Plus, with where his career is currently headed, Ricciardo would be delighted to be the wingman to Verstappen, and that is something that Damon Hill and Ralf Schumacher also believe. When it comes to Red Bull, the Austrian team has shown that there is no mercy for someone who isn't named Max Verstappen, and they are planning to implement this narrative as long as Verstappen is present in the team. Damon Hill, the F1 champion from 1996 and currently an analyst for Sky F1, spoke about this matter and Perez's seat for the 2023 season, adding, "It could be quite an interesting one if you think about the problems they have apparently had between Max and Sergio. Let's say the toys go out of the pram and there is some sort of fallout there. Daniel Ricciardo could be in prime position. It is his home and he does owe a lot to Red Bull, so he will be very keen to be back in that fold."
It would appear that they have closed the doors, or they've actually kept it inside the Red Bull camp, appearing to the world as though they are united. But it was very clear, wasn't it, that Max was not happy with being asked, he says last minute, and it wasn't properly discussed, to help Checo get that second place from Charles Leclerc.
What is it about the prodigal son who returns? He could be in a good position coming back and having learned a lot in other places. It can be that you can improve having been somewhere else, then returning to the place you started. Obviously, Ralf Schumacher has shared the same narrative, adding that Perez's seat in 2023 is not 100% certain, and rest assured that Red Bull fans will revolt if Perez is replaced mid-season after all he has done for the team. Still, the man who brought the Austrian team the championships is Max Verstappen, not Sergio Perez, and this is something that the Mexican needs to understand and obey if he wants to have a legitimate shot at staying with Red Bull. With that being said, the Austrian team doesn't want any surprises, as they are poised to make a huge splash in the upcoming years, given the fact that Verstappen is currently in this form. What do you think will happen next with Perez and his relationship with Red Bull? Do you think that it has reached a point of no return? Let us know in the comments below.